Most people I talk to about money say some version of the same thing. I know what I'm supposed to do, I just don't do it. They usually say it with a little embarrassment, almost like they're admitting a flaw they should have fixed by now. Sometimes they try to soften it with humor. Other times they sound genuinely frustrated, like they've already decided that money will always be hard no matter what they try. What almost always sits underneath that statement is a quiet belief that the problem must be them. And if they were more disciplined, more motivated, or more responsible, their finances would finally fall into place. Over time, that belief hardens into an identity. People stop saying, I'm struggling with money, and they start saying, I'm just bad with money. And once this shift happens, every setback feels personal instead of informational, and progress slows even more. So look, here's the short answer before we go any further. The problem is not that you lack discipline. The problem is that most money systems are built for robots and not for people. The people who quietly build wealth are not more motivated or more intense. They rely on habits that remove pressure instead of adding it. And that's what this video is about. These are 7 boring money habits that showed up again and again in people who build wealth without drama, without constant anxiety, and without burning themselves out. Look, I'm gonna be honest with you, none of these habits feel impressive. None of them will make you feel like you're winning in the moment, and that's exactly why they work. The first habit is that quietly wealthy people aggressively reduce how often they have to make money decisions. See, most people don't realize how much mental energy money consumes because the decisions are scattered throughout the day. You don't sit down and formally decide to make financial choices. They sneak in while you're tired, distracted, or stressed. You see something online, you walk past something in a store, you think about an upcoming bill. Each moment asks you to decide whether to spend, delay, justify, or negotiate. Each decision feels small, but together they create decision fatigue, and that fatigue builds. The quality of the decision declines. This is why people rarely make their worst money choices when they feel calm and rested. They make them late at night, during stressful weeks, or when they're emotionally depleted. This isn't a character flaw, it's how the brain works. What most people miss about this habit is how deeply it affects their sense of control. When you're constantly deciding, negotiating, and second guessing, money starts to feel like something that is always slipping through your fingers. Even when nothing is technically wrong, your brain stays on high alert because it never gets a clear signal that things are handled. This is why people often say they feel mentally tired around money. It's not the math, it's the constant cognitive load. Every open loop, every I'll figure it out later keeps money emotionally active in your mind. And over time, that drains your attention and makes avoidance more tempting. So quietly wealthy people don't eliminate choice entirely, but they move choice upstream. They decide once ahead of time instead of repeatedly in the moment. They decide what happens automatically. They decide which categories matter and which don't. They decide what requires thought and what doesn't deserve it. This creates a subtle but powerful shift. Money stops feeling like something that needs constant supervision and starts feeling like something that runs in the background. And look, when fewer decisions demand attention, stress naturally declines. Not because income changed, but because the mental friction did. This is also why willpower never works in a long-term strategy. Willpower assumes you will always have energy available when decisions show up. Structure assumes the opposite. Structure plans for fatigue, and the people who plan for fatigue are the ones who stay consistent over time. Now, the second habit is that quietly wealthy people keep their fixed costs intentionally boring. Fixed costs are the expenses that are hard to change quickly. So think of things like housing, cars, insurance, subscriptions, and long-term commitments. These costs quietly determine how much pressure your life carries. And once they increase, they raise the minimum income required to just feel okay. Most people focus their energy on small discretionary spending while allowing fixed costs to creep upward over time. Quietly wealthy people reverse that focus. They understand that their flexibility is far more valuable than appearance. Before increasing a fixed cost, they ask whether it permanently raises the baseline or stress in their life. And this matters because income is rarely as stable as people assume. Careers can change, businesses fluctuate, health events happen, and the economy is never predictable. When fixed costs are high, any disruption feels threatening. When fixed costs are boring, life stays adaptable. So, keeping fixed costs boring doesn't mean living without enjoyment. It means protecting breathing room. It means choosing sustainability over short-term upgrades that quietly lock you into higher pressure. Over time, this single habit does more to reduce stress than most people realize. The third habit is that quietly wealthy people let margin build before upgrading their lifestyle. So think of margin like this. It's the space between what you earn and what you need to live. That space absorbs shock. It reduces anxiety. It creates options. And without margin, even a high income feels fragile because every surprise becomes a crisis. Most people increase their lifestyle at the same pace as their income, sometimes even faster. A raise comes in and expenses follow almost immediately. Quietly wealthy people slow that process down. They allow income increases to settle. They let margin accumulate before committing to higher obligations. One of the hardest parts about building margin is that it doesn't come with external validation. No one sees it. No one compliments it. There's no visible reward for choosing not to upgrade when you could. In a culture that celebrates visible progress, margin can feel invisible and unsatisfying. And that is why so many people sabotage margin without realizing it. They don't consciously reject it. They simply trade it away piece by piece. A slightly higher payment here, a longer commitment there. Each choice feels reasonable. Collectively, they erase flexibility. Quietly wealthy people understand that margin is not about deprivation. It's about optionality. Margin allows you to say no without panic. It allows you to change direction without collapse. It allows you to absorb mistakes without spiraling. And without margin, every decision carries weight. With margin, decisions become lighter. You're no longer operating on the edge of tolerance. You're operating with space. And over time, margin changes how you experience money emotionally. The urgency softens, the fear recedes. You stop feeling like one wrong move will undo everything. And that psychological shift often matters more than the numerical one. The fourth habit is that quietly wealthy people separate money review from emotion. They don't constantly check their accounts. They don't let money dictate their mood throughout the day. Come on. Constant monitoring creates anxiety without improving outcomes. It keeps money emotionally loud in your mind, even when nothing is actually wrong. Instead, they review their finances on a schedule, weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly, depending on the system. These reviews can happen in calm moments, not in the middle of stress or exhaustion. The focus is on patterns rather than individual transactions. This separation matters more than most people think. Decisions made during stress tend to be reactive and a little short-sighted. Decisions made during calm review tend to be thoughtful and sustainable. When money stops interrupting your day, it stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling like a tool. So over time, this habit alone can dramatically reduce anxiety because money no longer shows up as constant background noise that demands your attention. The fifth habit is that quietly wealthy people give money direction without turning it into a cage. They are intentional, but not rigid. They know what their money is for, but they leave room for flexibility. Instead of detailed budgets that require constant maintenance, they use broad categories and clear priorities. Look, this matters because overly restrictive systems almost always lead to rebellion. When money feels too controlled, people eventually break the system. They overspend, feel guilty, overcorrect, and repeat the cycle. Quietly wealthy people design systems that reduce regret rather than enforce control. Money works best when it's guided, not when it's micromanaged. Direction creates calm, control creates resistance, and over time, this approach leads to better behavior with far less effort. The sixth habit is that quietly wealthy people treat emotional spending as expected, not shameful. People spend emotionally to celebrate, to cope, to feel normal, to relieve stress. Look, quietly wealthy people don't deny this reality. They plan for it. Most people dramatically underestimate how much shame interferes with financial progress. Shame does not motivate better behavior. It narrows thinking, encourages avoidance, and pushes decisions underground where they can't be examined honestly. When emotional spending is treated as failure, people stop looking at it clearly. They hide purchases, they avoid reviewing accounts, they promise themselves they'll do better next time without understanding what actually happened. Quietly wealthy people take a different approach. They assume emotion will show up. so they make room for it in advance. This changes the entire relationship with spending. Instead of reacting after the fact, they design boundaries ahead of time. When spending is contained, it becomes information instead of evidence of failure. You can look at patterns without judgment. You can notice triggers without spiraling, and you can make adjustments without shame. This is one of the most overlooked reasons why quietly wealthy people stay consistent. They're not constantly recovering from guilt. They are not oscillating between restriction and release. Their system absorbs emotion instead of it being broken by it. The 7th habit is that quietly wealthy people prioritize consistency over intensity. They don't chase perfect strategies. They don't rely on bursts of motivation. They build small, repeatable routines that hold up over time. Weekly reviews instead of daily micromanagement. Simple systems instead of complex plans. Progress instead of perfection. Consistency is what builds trust. Trust builds momentum, and momentum compounds quietly. This habit is deeply unglamorous. There's nothing to show off, but it's the reason wealth gets built quietly instead of through cycles of burnout and recovery. So look, when you step back and look at these 7 habits all together, a clear pattern emerges. None of them rely on motivation. None of them require you to be a different person. All of them rely on structured. People who build wealth quietly are not more disciplined. They simply design environments where good behavior is easier than bad behavior. If these habits feel obvious but difficult to maintain, that's not a contradiction. It's a signal that the underlying system still needs attention. And this is where this video connects directly back to what we talked about earlier on this channel in this video. In the video where we break down why people feel broke even when they make good money, we talked about how stress often comes from unpredictability and fragmentation, not from income itself. And these habits are how that diagnosis turns into action. They don't increase income, they reduce pressure. If these habits resonate but feel hard to sustain, that doesn't mean you're failing. It means behavior is downstream of structure. Until the system changes, effort will always feel heavier than it should. If you haven't watched that video yet, or if this conversation felt familiar, go back to it. Not to judge yourself and not to feel behind, but to understand what your stress is actually responding to. Because once the system changes, behavior stops feeling like a fight, and it becomes when progress finally becomes sustainable.